This is Agriculture Today. We are back now for our bi-monthly Ag Law segment with Roger McEowen. He is a K-State and Washburn University School of Law professor. So, Roger, thanks for joining us.
Good to be with you, Samantha.
Absolutely. So this week, I understand you wanted to talk about the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act, or TCJA, as you have coined the acronym for it.
Well, more specifically, the impact of TCJA on estate planning this year as well as next year, because we just got some new numbers out with respect to the inflation-adjusted amount of the basic exclusion for 2023, and it really highlights what TCJA did, and that was a law that was enacted in the Trump administration. It took effect starting with tax years after 2017, and it goes through 2025, and from an estate planning standpoint, it increased the unified credit applicable exclusion, known as the basic exclusion amount, from $5 million to $10 million, and then indexed it for inflation. And we're currently setting for deaths in 2022 as well as taxable gifts made this year at $12.06 million, which means you don't have an estate tax problem at the federal level until your taxable estate exceeds that threshold. And there's not very many estates at all, let alone ag estates, that trip that level. Now, if you do, it's a big problem. But the exclusion being so high means that maybe some estate planning gets forgotten in the process because people are thinking, well, I don't have any tax problem at all. But estate planning is bigger than just tax.
Absolutely. And like you mentioned, there's a lot of farmers and ranchers that won't have issues with this. But because of that, like you said, they neglect sometimes estate planning. So what really does estate planning involve for those producers?
Yeah, I think the basic point for many producers that won't face an estate tax, as well as for others, I think this is a comment that's general for everybody, is what we call income tax basis planning. And that means we want to cause property to be taxed in the decedent's estate at death, so that the recipients of that property get a stepped-up basis equal to the fair market value at death of that property. What that does is it wipes out all the appreciation in that value while the decedent held that property. And we've got a lot of farm and ranch property that's been held by an individual for 30, 40, 50 years, if not more, and their income tax basis may be really low. And so achieving that stepped-up basis at death by causing that property to be taxed in the estate is a big deal. And with the exemption so high, there probably won't be any estate tax concern at all for most people, but yet you still get the basis increase. That's really the beauty of the TCJA.
So down to the basics of what producers really need to know, what are the main issues that people need to understand?
Well, as I indicated, we want to try to utilize strategies to cause inclusion of the property in the taxable estate to get that basis step up. But I think for most people, you have to focus on avoiding common errors. And for some, it's getting started in the estate planning process to begin with. A lot of people haven't done anything, perhaps because they don't know where to start. So you need to get started. But for those that get started or those that already have a plan, take a look at it. A lot of plans that have been sitting there for a number of years have outdated language that needs to be modified in existing wills and trusts because the law has changed. And so what you want to look for there are what we call formula clause language that allocates a certain portion of the estate to go to, for example, a surviving spouse with a balance passing to the kids. Well, is that formula clause language still up to date? That's something that a professional needs to examine for you. And, of course, since the last time an estate plan was visited, maybe your goals and objectives have changed. Maybe you've acquired more land. Maybe you have different set up amongst family members that now maybe have different needs. Is there a special need that a particular heir has that indicates certain types of trusts that may need to be created? What are health issues? Things change as time goes along, and therefore estate plans need to change with it. And so it's those basic things that we don't want to let slip through the cracks, so to speak, just because we think we don't have a tax problem. Estate planning, again, I come back to that, is much bigger than just tax.
Absolutely, yeah. And you've mentioned one of those things that it includes as well, which is the impact of inflation. You've mentioned that multiple times now. And obviously, in our current climate, we're experiencing a lot of inflation. So in terms of what producers need to keep in mind in these current times, what are some of those things that involve inflation that they should be planning for?
Yeah, that's a good question because there's really two aspects of inflation. One, is we're seeing increase in land values across the country, and that's been the case for the past 2 or 3 years. Land values continue to be strong. Well, as land values increase, that increases the value of a farmer or rancher's estate. Land is the number one asset for most people in terms of value that they own. And so as those land values go up, it causes the estate value to rise. For example, I was looking at some data. Iowa land values now easily you can find tracts of land just average in excess of $10,000 per acre. Well, you get a 1,000-acre farm, and you're going to be pretty close to your exclusion amount right there. And so land value and the inflation impact of land values is a big deal. We have to watch that with respect to estate plans. The other aspect, the second aspect of inflation, is that it's eating away at the value of the dollars that you have in your hand. It's eroding retirement accounts. The stock market devaluation. The stock market's been coming down. That's collapsing retirement funds. And then the remaining funds that you have are buying less. So as part of estate planning is financial planning and the impacts of inflation that's eroding the current dollars that you have and maybe what you have been saving for retirement. So it's kind of a double-edged sword, so to speak, that impacts estate planning.
Absolutely. Yeah, good reminders for sure, and especially in terms of the current conditions we're living in. And then when it comes to the TCJA, it expires in 2026. So what do you think the estate tax exemption will be at that point when this thing that's put in place actually expires?
Boy, that is the great question. If we knew that, that would be really helpful. It would simply be helpful if Congress would pick a number, set it for inflation, index it for inflation, and leave it alone. But as you said, this law does expire at the end of 2025. So when we get to 2026, what's already baked in the law is that the exemption is going to drop to $5 million, adjusted for inflation in 2011 dollars. So most of us think it'll probably be between $7 and $8 million if Congress does nothing. That's where we go. Now, will they do nothing or will they change that? That's really the question there. And you asked what I think on this. I think they will do something between now and then. I don't think that it will drop back to the $5 million inflation-adjusted amount. It's never gone down except for what happened in 2010, and that was kind of an anomaly for 1 year. So I don't think it'll be less than where we're at now or what the inflation-adjusted amount is when we get to 2025. Which is probably going to be around $15 million. Just next year, it's going to go from $12.06 million this year to $12.92 million next year. We're going to have a 1-year increase just because of inflation of $860,000. That's the biggest ever. In fact, when I started practicing 30 years ago, the exclusion itself was only $600,000. Now we have a 1-year increase of $860,000. It's just incredible. So I suspect, if I were to put a number on it and guessing, I'd say there's probably a greater than 50% chance it'll be in the $15 million range when we get to 2026. But don't bet the farm on it.
Absolutely, yeah. Some key points for producers to keep in mind for sure. But Roger, if they're looking for more information on this topic, where can they find that at?
I've got a recent blog article out on this. It can be accessed from the homepage of my website, which is washburnlaw.edu/Walter, WALTR, and then down the left-hand side you can see the item to click on there for the agricultural law and tax report, and it's a blog article of September 24.
Absolutely. Well, we'll have that linked in the show notes of today's program as well. But like I said, some excellent information for producers to just kind of be thinking about. I think it's sometimes hard for producers to think about these topics. It's not always the most thrilling thing or the most exciting thing to have to think about, but good information for sure. So thank you, Roger.
Thank you, Samantha.
Absolutely. Once again, that was Roger McEowen. He is a K-State and Washburn University School of Law Ag Law professor for our bi-monthly Ag Law Update. As always, if you are on the go and listening to us on the radio with one of our radio station partners, and you're wanting to listen to more from Agriculture Today, be sure to check out our podcast. We are available as a podcast anywhere podcasts can be found. Simply search for Agriculture Today, and you should find us there. Be sure to give us a listen, and that's also where the show notes for today's program can also be found with all of the available links that are discussed during today's programming.